What is up, YouTube? I'm Devon DaVinci, leader of the Renaissance crew, and you're watching DaVinci Reacts. Today we'll be getting to another video that falls in line with the Oversimplified series. This is World War II, done by Oversimplified. This is part 1, in case you guys happen to get this confused, because this is a 2-part video, or in case I happen to get confused and label it part 2 instead of part 1 like I did for the last one I did. That was my fault, you guys. I'm sorry about that. But anyway, let's go ahead and check this out and see what it has to offer. Oversimplified really does a really good job when it comes to, I guess, summarizing some of the historical events that they tend to cover. There's a lot of smaller videos also. There was one that was called the Football Wars and the Falkland Wars and the Emu Wars and a bunch of other stuff. I'll take care of those after I get the main historical events out of the way. But there's also another video that he has where he talks about the life of Hitler, and I'll probably check that out after I get done with this series. And this is, of course, World War II. I know a lot about World War II. I already know about most of the stuff that happened in World War II. I don't know everything. I would like to get people's take on it, especially considering the fact that a lot of people that are subscribed to my channel are from the UK or from Europe, and I would really like to get people's opinions about. Well, I guess you're probably not old enough to. I don't think I have a lot of subscribers that are old enough to remember like the actual impact that World War II had and things like that. But hopefully there are some people that still have some lingering memories, especially in Eastern Europe. I know because of the Soviet Union and the Iron Curtain and the Berlin Wall and things like that. Hopefully there's some people that can give me some information as to like what the environment was like during that time, because I mean you hear a lot of it from like history books and things like that, but it's another thing to get the walking real life experience of people who actually was there and been through it. But anyway, we can go ahead and talk about that after. As of right now, let's go ahead and jump into this and see what it has to offer.
This video was made possible by Skillshare.
And I will leave his ads in here.
Churchill was a man with many talents. He was an artist, a butterfly enthusiast, and he had an unpublished manuscript about aliens. Clearly, he was a man with an insatiable thirst for knowledge. Maybe he could have loaded up his computer and logged onto Skillshare, an online learning community with more than 19,000 classes in design, business, technology, and more. Perhaps he was considering a side career in fashion, but didn't know where to start. On Skillshare, he would find courses in fashion design and garment construction. Or if he wanted to learn app design, improve his photography, or just how to make a really good quesadilla, he would have found courses for all of these and more on Skillshare.
Looks like an omelet
gives you access to high-quality classes taught by genuine experts working in their field. I work heavily with animation, and I was genuinely blown away by the number of really useful courses available to me, like this class full of tips and tricks for creating vector art, or this one for creating character walk cycles. For an annual subscription, Skillshare is under $10 a month. And if you'd like to try it out first, then I've got a deal just for Oversimplified viewers. The first 1,000 people to use this link, which can be found in the description, will get their first 2 months of Skillshare for just 99 cents.
I might end up using that, actually.
Be sure to try it out using the link in the description and learn something new today. Now, without further ado. It's 1902. A young man by the name of Benito Mussolini moves from Italy to Switzerland to avoid military service. He gets big into socialism, working for trade unions, writing for socialist newspapers, advocating a violent overthrow of European monarchies, the whole shebang. This gets him in a bit of trouble with the Swiss police, so he gets arrested, sent back to Italy, set free, returns to Switzerland, is arrested again, goes back to Italy again, completes his military service after previously avoiding it, and then after a brief stint as an elementary school teacher, he finally returns to work as an avid socialist. His speeches and journalistic ability.
Let that be a lesson, everybody. The thing that started World War II and fascism as a whole and things like that wasn't any type of political ideals or being on some part of political spectrums or atrocities in society. No, it was children. Kids are the reason World War II started. Let that be a lesson to everybody out there before you get pregnant. Children started World War II. Children created Hitler. Just remember that.
These made him famous among Italian socialists. He was anti-war, so when Italy colonized Libya in 1910, he rioted. and got arrested. Then World War I came along, and once again he protested Italy's involvement. But then he thought, wait a minute, this war could bring about the social climate needed to overthrow European monarchies and bring about the socialist revolution everywhere. And suddenly he was pro-war. But his fellow socialists didn't like his new pro-war stance, so they kicked him out of the party. So then he said, you know what? I'm done with socialism. We need something new, not based on class divisions tearing us apart, but based on unity through nationality. We'll conquer the Mediterranean and reunite all Italian peoples just like the days of the Roman Empire. I'll call it fascismo, and it will guide the Italian nation to greatness. That's all well and good, Mr. Mussolini, but what kind of haircut am I giving you? Let's go with bold.
And a staple was created. You know, with all those pictures, he wasn't really bald. Balding.
Italy had been on the winner's side in World War I, and they hoped they were going to get a lot out of it, but in the end, they only got a little, and they felt cheated. On top of that, a bad economy and weak governments meant that the Italian people were a little unhappy. So when Mussolini came along and said that he could fix everything, his fascist movement gained a lot of support. In 1922, he went to the king and said, make me prime minister, or I'll make me prime minister. And the king said, you and what army? This army. Fair enough. Then he went about establishing a dictatorship with himself at its center. Europe had its first fascist dictator. Next up, Germany. Germany had been on the loser's side, and they got absolutely wrecked by the Treaty of Versailles. They lost territory, had to demilitarize the Rhineland, had to reduce their army to just 100,000 men, couldn't have an air force, had to pay the Allies a huge amount of money that it didn't have, and a new rule was established that every Englishman withheld the right to walk into the center of Berlin, pick out any German they wanted, and spank the hell out of them. I made that last one up, but it helps you understand how all of this felt to Germans. On top of that, a bad economy and weak governments meant that when a small angry man with a silly mustache came along and said that he could fix everything, the German people loved it. Hitler had been a soldier during World War I, and he was crazy patriotic, and nobody was madder than him about Germany's humiliation. He helped start a new political party, and in 1923 attempted a march on Munich with his boys. And then he got arrested. But his popularity grew and grew, and in 1933, the president made him chancellor. He believed he was Germany's great destined savior, and he went full megalomaniac, establishing a dictatorship with himself at its center. Europe had fascist dictator number 2. Hitler and Mussolini had a lot of the same ideas, but more importantly, they had the same enemies, and they started to get along. Anyone else want to be friends? Franco? No? You good? I do. Who's that? It's Japan, and they've taken over northern China. Let's rewind a bit.
Yeah.
Japan had isolated itself from the rest of the world for over 200 years until the Americans showed up and said, you're going to trade with us and you're going to like it. Then the Western powers imposed a bunch of unequal treaties, meaning Japan's economy was bust. They also had no natural resources, so they decided to go get some. They went to war with China to gain a sphere of influence over Korea, and they took a bunch of China's stuff. But then the West said, hey, cut that out. And since Japan couldn't take on the West, they said, okay, I guess we'll just go home. Wait a minute, what are you doing? Taking advantage of a weakened China and setting up spheres of influence. But I was the one who weakened them. We know. And you guys didn't let me have anything. We know. That seems unfair. We don't think so.
See, this is what I was talking about when I was in the other video. I said I was talking about things that if the West would have just like been more, I don't want to say sympathetic with certain countries' like causes and reason for doing stuff, but I guess the word I'm looking for is if they would have been more fair. Like they just felt like they ran the world, so they could pretty much do whatever the hell they want, and things had to just go in line with the way that they, believed in stuff. So when Japan pretty much weakened China and stuff like that, which was fucked up, by the way. I'm not going to say that what they did was right. But if the West would have, like, I guess not tried to take advantage of it, like, if they would have, if after Japan attacked China initially, or at least attacked Korea and then, a little bit of China initially, and would have, and, the West told them to back off and they backed off. If the West would have just left it at that and not tried to create spheres of influence, that probably could have kept relations with Japan and the Western world a little bit more, I guess, not as frigid as it became. But, yeah, it's just like greed and stuff like that seems to be the thing that led everyone into these parts of this world war. Like, just whatever. I'm rambling at this point. I know this is going too long. Let's get back into it, but you know what I mean.
Okay, see ya. So Japan thought, screw this, and went to war with Russia, and stunned everyone by actually winning. Then they fully annexed Korea, but they didn't stop there. In World War I, they took Germany's colonies and islands in Asia. And then in an incident that was maybe staged by the Japanese army, a bomb blew up a Japanese train in Manchuria, giving them an excuse to launch an invasion and take over. So here's the situation. Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and Japan all believe they're racially superior, all feel hostility towards the Allies, and all want to militarize and take over more stuff. And so they did. Let's start with Germany. Hitler hated the Treaty of Versailles, and now he was ready to begin undoing it. In complete violation of the treaty, the first Luftwaffe squadrons were set up, conscription was introduced, and he pimped up his army. The Allies did nothing. Then Hitler sent his army back into the demilitarized Rhineland, giving orders to immediately retreat if the Allies showed up. The Allies...
I'm going to go back a little bit, but isn't it interesting how Hitler was able to pretty much go from, like, what they say, like a tenth of their original army and no air force and no anything, to go from that to what they, like, the war machine they eventually turned into within, I don't know off the top of my head when Hitler supposedly came into power, but it had to have been within like a decade or just over a decade maybe. But to go from like pretty much nothing to the war machine they became, where they had enough power to pretty much fight on two fronts, just it was a lot of bad strategy involved, and that's the reason why they lost. But to be able to hold a battle against like Western powers and Russia with what they created within a matter of like a decade is insane.
Did nothing. With his military re-strengthened, he could now move on to step 2. He wanted to rapidly increase the Aryan population, and to do so, he needed Lebensraum, or in other words, he would have to take over the world. But for now, a good portion of Europe would do, and he began eyeing up his neighbors. The Allies finally started to get worried, so they implemented a fairly useless diplomatic strategy called appeasement, and it went a little something like this. Hitler would say, I want that thing, and the Allies would say, you can't have that thing. Okay, you can have that thing, but no more. I want that thing. And repeat. In 1938, Hitler's army marched into Austria and just took it, with no resistance. Boom, this is Germany now. Next, he demanded to be given the Sudetenland, an area of Czechoslovakia with many ethnic Germans. The Allies held a meeting with Hitler in Munich and said, look, we're going to give you what... Hang on, this meeting is about my territory. Shouldn't I come to the meeting too? Anyway, we're going to give you what you want.
Again, the West completely ignoring a country that they consider to be a little bit lesser than them. Why won't you let Czechoslovakia into the negotiations? They're lucky Czechoslovakia didn't fucking get a dictator and start taking over some shit, because that's usually how it works. The West ignores a lesser country. The lesser country ends up building up some type of military or something like that. And then decades down the line, we have this thing that we have to fight against that we wouldn't have had to fight against if you would have taken them serious from the beginning. The thing, it could be said, and this is coming from an American, this could be said about Vietnam. This could be said about Korea. This could be said about Afghanistan and Al-Qaeda and the Taliban and shit like that. Like, just take stuff serious when it is presented to you, and you won't have to worry about these damn problems down the line. Stop kicking the damn problem further out so that future generations have to worry about it.
Really? Yeah. Just like that? Yep. What's the catch? Just sign this piece of paper promising you won't invade the rest of Czechoslovakia. Okay. Then Chamberlain returned home victorious, waving his signed piece of paper in the air, declaring crisis to be averted and the continuation of world peace, and we built a statue of Chamberlain in his honor, and every day on the 30th of September we celebrate Chamberlain Day. Hitler's invading the rest of Czechoslovakia. What? He's invading the rest of Czechoslovakia. Oh. You lied to me. What do you expect? I'm Hitler. Not to be outdone, Mussolini also wanted to get in on the action. He thought to himself, isn't there a not yet colonized nation somewhere which is so underdeveloped that the people would be defending themselves against our tanks with literal bows and arrows and wooden spears? Oh, there is? Fantastic. And so he took it. Italy also wanted to control the entrance to the Adriatic Sea, so they occupied Albania. Then, in another incident which was maybe staged by the Japanese, gunfire was exchanged by Japanese and Chinese troops at the Marco Polo Bridge, and the Japanese launched yet another invasion against China. They swept through Beijing and Shanghai, and then advanced through the Yangtze Valley to China's then capital, Nanking. It was here that saw the worst of Japan's shocking atrocities committed against the Chinese people. Back in Europe,
Yeah, it
Germany
was
and Italy
crazy.
made their relationship status official by signing the Pact of Steel. Then, Hitler turned his eyes towards Poland and the hated Polish corridor, splitting Germany in two. At this point, the Allies really had to put their foot down, and they warned him that an invasion of Poland would mean war. Hitler had planned to continue his advance eastward, but he didn't want to end up fighting a war on two fronts. So for now, he made an alliance with Stalin, saying, "How about we both invade Poland and split it between the two of us, and I definitely won't not refrain from not betraying you sometime in the future."
Those double negatives, they can get you.
Good. This new alliance stunned the West. On the 1st of September 1939, German troops entered Poland, and Britain and France declared war on Germany. The Poles fought hard, but they were no match for the two giants crashing down on them from either side. Then came a period known as the Phoney War, where everyone just sort of sat around not doing much. The French had launched a small invasion into the Saarland, but they maintained mostly defensive positions, and after a while decided to just turn around and call it a day. Speaking of France, the French were still super proud of their victory in World War I, and they hadn't really moved on from it. They still used horses, they dispatched messages by motorbike instead of using radio, orders from the commander-in-chief were usually pretty vague, and the troops were rarely inspected. They built a line of defenses along the German border, but didn't bother extending it all the way to the Channel, and they wouldn't launch artillery strikes against Germany out of fear of being retaliated against. In a war, they didn't want to attack the enemy. And at first the UK wasn't much better. Chamberlain still naively hoped that the war could be ended diplomatically. Instead of bombing raids, the RAF dropped propaganda leaflets over German cities, which one air marshal said likely did nothing but provide the continent with toilet paper for the duration of the war. They also only sent 200,000 men to France, while the French had mobilized millions. Both Britain and France wanted to avoid a repeat of the First World War, and so they wanted to keep the war as far from home as possible. So they turned their eyes north, towards Norway. Neutral Sweden was exporting iron ore to Germany through neutral Norway, so the Allies asked them if they could please stop exporting iron ore to Germany, but this request was refused. Then, the Soviet Union attacked Finland, so the Allies said, "How about we land troops in Norway and move them across Sweden to go help out your good pal Finland, and along the way maybe take control of all your armfields?" But Norway and Sweden still said no. So the UK mined the waters around Norway to force any transport ships into international waters, and they also attacked a German tanker they found in the area. Hitler realized what the Allies were up to, and he quickly moved to secure his supply of iron ore. He launched an invasion through Denmark into Norway. The Allies rushed to land troops at key ports along the coast, but Germany had taken control of Norway's airfield, and their air superiority decided the fight. The Allies had to retreat. After this slightly embarrassing failure, Chamberlain resigned and was replaced with Winston Churchill, who had a slightly different approach to dealing with the Germans. Hitler's overall strategy was similar to Germany's First World War strategy. Attack France, defeat France, knocking out the UK in the process, then turn on the Soviet Union and win the war. During the Phoney War, the Allies had given Hitler time to prepare his forces. Now, he was ready to attack. The Allies had wanted to place troops in Belgium, but Belgium had refused, and in a move that surprised pretty much no one, Hitler launched an invasion to get around France's defenses. The Allies charged into Belgium at full speed to meet the German invasion head-on, and it looked like a repeat of the First World War was coming. But this time, Hitler had a trick up his sleeve. Blitzkrieg. As the Germans advanced, they sent thousands of refugees westward, slowing down the Allies. Then, to the south, the French had left the Ardennes, an area full of hills and forests, pretty underdefended, because they thought it was naturally impenetrable.
Yeah.
Well, the Germans were about to penetrate it with everything they had. They smashed 50 Wehrmacht divisions through and encircled the Allied armies at lightning speed. The best of the Allied forces were now trapped. The Germans squeezed in from all sides, taking out France's best armies and nearly wiping out the British too, but they managed to make a desperate last-minute escape at Dunkirk, with British civilian ships even making the perilous journey to bring their young men home. With most of the French forces depleted, the Germans breezed through, taking Paris, and France fell. What the Germans couldn't do in World War I, Hitler had done just like that. Yep. Hitler hoped that with the fall of...
And again, like I said, it's less than a decade, and they were able to create a machine that was able to not only... I guess they had the benefit of having done it once already, but they did something they couldn't do in World War I. They beat France. They completely took over France. And I mean, in war, you kind of have an advantage if your home country is on an island or at least isolated from the battles. I think that's the main reason why Great Britain wasn't taken over, because you still have to get to that island and you have to fight while you're trying to reach that island. So it makes it a lot harder to actually get there. And even if you do get there, you're kind of at a disadvantage because you just had your ass whooped. Now you got to fight them on their home turf. That's one of the main reasons why the United States hasn't really been invaded, because all of the countries that are near us are our biggest allies, or at least I hope so, with Trump in office and everything. But yeah, our closest allies are the countries nearest to us, and the countries that we tend to have issue with, we're so far away from that they can't get planes or anything over here. So, and we have technology in like aircraft carriers and things like that, so we can pretty much launch an offensive in like anywhere in the world. So that's why we have our advantage. But yeah, Great Britain was at a very beneficial situation right here.
France, the UK would also lose hope and sue for peace. But quite annoyingly, it didn't, and he needed to secure the Western Front, so he tried to force them into submission with mind games. The UK were now all alone, and Hitler wanted to emphasize that. First of all, just before France fell, Italy finally declared war on the Allies, making the UK's situation even worse. Next, instead of just occupying all of France, Hitler occupied the coastal areas for defense, but allowed France to continue its existence as a German puppet state. This way, it looked like the UK's old ally had decided to switch sides. Hitler also hoped that the UK wouldn't attack any of her old allies' navy bases or colonies in Africa, giving Hitler an extra line of defense to the south. But the UK made sure to respond to this by sailing down to France's navy base in Algeria and wrecking a bunch of ships. So
just to do it.
Hitler then began laying down plans for an invasion of Great Britain. Before German troops could land on British soil, he would first need air and naval superiority across the Channel. Waves of German bombers came, while the completely outnumbered RAF worked bravely around the clock in an attempt to quell the German attacks. At first, the Luftwaffe targeted British ports and coastal facilities. Then it attacked RAF bases, crippling the RAF's ability to defend the nation. And it looked like Hitler's Great British invasion was coming. But then, Churchill ordered a small, pretty insignificant bombing raid over Berlin. It didn't do much damage, but Hitler was furious, and he immediately ordered the Luftwaffe to refocus its attacks on civilian targets in London.
That little
Children were
word
sent
play
off to the countryside, away from their parents to avoid danger, and frequent trips to air raid shelters became a daily occurrence. But British morale held firm. Smiling, knitting, lounging casually, these people have balls of steel. This refocusing on London also gave the RAF breathing space to reorganize, so Hitler kind of shot himself in the foot there. Just the foot for now. Finally, the Luftwaffe sent one massive all-out attack on London, and the RAF successfully repelled it, destroying many of the German aircraft and placing air superiority firmly in British hands. Hitler's invasion had to be postponed, but the bombing of British cities continued for some time.
All right, yep. I will be tackling part 2 in another recording session. But yeah, it's amazing, like I said, how much they were able to do with the little bit of time that they had between pretty much demilitarizing themselves and being able to create an army and an air force and things like that quickly. And to do it, not only to do it, but to do it in a way that their forces were, I don't know what the rank was at the time, like who the greatest military was in the world. Like, you know, like nowadays we pretty much we rank it. We know who number 1 is, number 2 is, number 3 is, and so on and so forth. But I don't really know exactly where the German forces were ranked at that time, but I do know that considering the fact that they were fighting a war on 2 fronts and were going to war against, I want to say, well, it was a lot of countries, but the 3 biggest, which were Soviet Union, the British, and the United States, the fact they were fighting against all 3 of them and, you know, hold their own for a little bit, not for a long time, but for a little bit, it shows that they were pretty high ranked as far as military. So it's crazy. I've heard people mention also that that Japan to this day I don't think has a military now. I could be wrong. I'm pretty sure they have some type of force that they can use in conflict situations, but I think that they pretty much also demilitarized after World War II and haven't really come back from that. I could be wrong about that. Leave a comment in the comment section down below. But what I heard was that even though they did demilitarize themselves, they are pretty much in a position where if they needed to, they could create a pretty formidable army in like a very quick amount of time. Same thing with nuclear weapons. They don't have nuclear weapons officially, but I've heard that they got everything together that if they needed to, they could make a nuclear weapon really fast. Like I said, you guys can let me know about that in the comment section down below. And let's talk about the names for some of the military at the time. Now, I didn't know a lot about as far as like Germany named their brigades and stuff like that. I knew the names, but I didn't associate them with anything. Like I remember hearing about Luftwaffe and the Blitzkriegs, and I know it's not the military, but you know what I'm saying, names. Blitzkriegs and things like that. And I just looked up what the fuck a Reich was like they always called themselves the Third Reich, but I didn't know exactly what that was. But apparently that means, or what I've read, it means realm, and it's supposed to represent different like prosperous times in Germany's history. So I think they said the first Reich was the Holy Roman Empire. So for anyone that remembers the History of the World video, that was around the time when the Pope called the king and tried to make it seem like he was still part of the Roman Empire and it was really just Germany. But like that's that time. They said it was like 1,000 years or something. So that was a long ass prosperous period. And then the second one, I think they just identify as the German Empire. I'm not sure why, but that's what they call it. And that was, I want to say, either started in 1815 or it led up to 1815. And then the Third Reich was supposed to be the Nazi Germany and things like that. So I've heard people mention the Fourth Reich. Apparently that's a term that's only used with like neo-Nazis and things like that, where they want to try to return to the Nazi Empire or some shit. But I mean, the Fourth Reich could just be a prosperous time for Germany. It doesn't have to be some racial utopia or some shit. Like, just get Germany back to being a country that's well off. I don't know if you want to identify this period in time as something like that, but I remember seeing parts of a video that was, I believe it's called like Geography Now, I think is the name of it, and they talk about the history of countries. And I watched the video that they did about Germany, and they said that Germany has like this guilt where they don't really show a lot of nationality or national pride and things like that. And I think that's a shame. Even though they did do a huge fucking mistake in the past, same with Japan. I don't think that the generations after that should have to like suffer for it. As long as you learn your lesson and you don't do it again, I don't really see what the point of like constantly holding something like that over someone's head is. Like I said, as long as you do right by it. So as long as you do right by the Jewish people of the region, and you know, as far as like the forces that you invaded and the people you went to war against, the allies and stuff, as long as you pretty much fix that and then promise not to do it again, I think that everything should be okay, because constantly holding that over someone's head is not going to actually fix the problem. The term Luftwaffe, I always thought that when I was growing up, I thought that it was like waffles. Like I always thought about waffles. So I think of it, it's funny, like Germany had a fucking army of flying waffles going around just killing and attacking shit. But anyway, that's pretty much it. Let me go ahead and end this because I'm not sure how much time I have. Okay, I'm on the very end of the clock. I'm glad I looked at the time. I'm gonna go ahead and end this. I want to thank everybody for coming through and checking this out. If you have any more information and facts, please leave it in the comment section down below, because I really want to, you know, get the nitty gritty about details that aren't really talked about a lot. And like I said, if you're a part of Europe and you happen to like be around during the aftermath of World War II, it doesn't have to be immediately after. It could be like decades later, but if you still felt something and you can like talk about it, be sure to leave it in the comment section down below. But anyway, that's been this video. I'm Devon DaVinci, and you've just been a little bit more enlightened. I gotta end it because I'm against the clock right now. Deuces.